Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the ALT's live series on Facebook, all about land conservation and protection in the city of Attleboro. My name is Evan Foster, and I'm the TerraCore member for the Attleboro Land Trust. Today's guest is Danielle Cournoyer. Danielle is the current coordinator of the Attleboro Community Garden and has been sharing her gardening knowledge with the community through various workshops over the years. From 2017 to 2019, she joined forces with her friend Jamie Lee Shanahan, and together they operated Bloom Gardening for Good. This was a local educational gardening initiative and charity farm stand with the aim to connect, feed, educate, and give back to the greater Attleboro area. Today, Danielle will be discussing urban and suburban homesteading practices that you can achieve right on your property. If you have any questions for Danielle during the presentation, feel free to put those in the comment section and I will read them out to her after her presentation. So with that, I will bring up Danielle and let her start. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm very excited. This is one of my favorite topics. So as I was thinking about how I wanted to start this, I realized that the idea of homesteading can be a very broad thing for some people. I know for myself, when I first started thinking of homesteading, I thought that this is something that's done on, big properties and farms, and that's not something that's achievable here with most small backyard kind of thing. So I wanted to start by kind of doing some defining for us. So homesteading, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's a noun and it just says the life as a settler on a homestead. It's not very helpful. Many would define homesteading as living a lifestyle of self-sufficiency. So we can typically characterize this by subsistence farming or agriculture, home food preservation, and it might involve some sort of small scale production of textiles or like craft work. So I wrote down the 4 common types of homesteading. And we're going to really talk about the first 2. So the first type of homesteading is recognized as like apartment homestead. So we're thinking like an inner city dweller, what they can do. And then you can step up from there and we have your suburban or urban homesteading, which is really the opportunity for a suburb dweller to transform their backyards into like a thriving food garden space. You can step up further. And then we have our small scale homestead, which is usually less than 10 acres. I think most of us probably refer to them as like hobby farms. And then you have your large traditional homestead. So more than 10 acres, dedicated areas for specific crops, generally speaking, livestock pens, maybe a pond, some orchards. So we're really going to focus on like apartment homestead and urban homesteading. So again, things that we can accomplish if we're Attleboro residents or even some of the surrounding towns. So with that, so what is urban homesteading and what might it look like? So we're taking this concept of homesteading and we're going to in self-sufficient living and we're going to try to downscale this. So we might define urban homesteading as embracing a more sustainable and holistic lifestyle. So really we want to think simple and self-reliant. So this is really cool. I pulled this off of urbanhomestead.org, and they say that urban homesteading is about taking a step backwards and living a more simple and purposeful life, but doing it in a city environment surrounded by the modern world. And I really liked that because one of the great things about where I live in Attleboro, I love how close we are to everything. We are very close to downtown Attleboro. We are very close to the cities. We're not far away from Boston. We're not far away from Providence. We're not in the woods. We're, really, truly, I feel surrounded by the modern world. So to be able to accomplish this and just take a step back and still, you're not detaching yourself. You're still here. You're still present in this modern world, but we're still making efforts to live sustainably. So one other definition for urban homesteading is the participation in home-based activities such as gardening, raising poultry or small livestock, producing simple products through cottage industry, minimizing consumer purchasing, and generally seeking ways to increase self-sufficiency in a city or suburban environment. Okay. So now that we've like defined this and we all can, we understand like what is urban homesteading, and hopefully that gives you guys like a clear picture of like what we're talking about. What might that look like? How can you accomplish that? So I think the first thing to discuss would be gardening. I feel like you can't have a homestead without gardening. Personally, I mean, I'm sure you can. There are other ways to a homestead. We're going to talk about a lot of different ways. But I really feel that gardening is the foundation of homesteading, definitely the foundation of a modern homestead. So growing and preserving your own food is what we're going to talk about next. So again, definitely the most common way to kind of step into homesteading. And there are all kinds of ways to garden. There are all different types of gardens. So if we're talking about the apartment homestead, maybe you only have a balcony that that you can put things on. And you could have yourself a beautiful container garden. You don't need a big backyard. You can start small. You can do pots and grow bags. You can grow your lettuce. Especially if you have a shady balcony, you can grow your herbs and your lettuce, and that's something you can contribute to your household. Maybe you have a bigger balcony and you have a lot of sun. Actually, I'm going to give an example. My sister just this year renovated her yard, and anyway, she lost her garden space. So she has a balcony off her bedroom that she wasn't using. And so I shouldn't say she did this on her own, but she set up pots and grow bags, and she's able to grow peppers up there and tomatoes up there. She's got some, what are they called? The flower pots that the windowsill pots. And she's got them full with lettuce. I believe she even has a grow bag and a trellis, and she's trying to grow cucumbers up there. So you really don't need a lot of space. I'm a huge fan of using felt grow bags as the roots will self-prune, and it really keeps your plants from the roots getting crowded. So they're really great. I totally recommend grow bags if you are going the route of container gardens and pots. They're very, very, very useful. But you can do container gardens. You can do raised bed gardens. You could go with the traditional approach and plant in the ground. You could do vertical gardens. That's something that's really popular and very cool. If you have limited space, you could, there's a lot of different ways you could do vertical gardens. One example I can give you, when I first started gardening many, many years ago, my husband took a pallet and we propped it up against something, and there was wood on, both sides of the pallet. So we added a bottom and we filled it with some soil. I think we lined it with, some sort of weed fabric. And I had a 3-tier vertical garden of all my greens and lettuce. And we did that for, I think, 2 or 3 seasons, as I was starting to upgrade to bigger gardens. But I was able to get a significant amount of lettuce out of it. And it was enough to feed my family at the time. So again, that's just another way. And if you are looking for ideas on, how you can incorporate container gardening or vertical gardening into your household or your space, available space, the library has a ton of resources. There's a lot of cool books, which I do have some references for you guys in a bit. But really, the sky's the limit. There are so many ways to incorporate a garden into your space. So again, with this being the foundation of the modern homestead, the idea is that people can grow whatever they can with whatever space they have available to them. That's really what you want to think. You don't need to go into this thinking, well, I don't have enough room. No, it's whatever space you have available, what can you put there? You don't need to expand your space. You just need to open up your mind and think about what can go there. Is it sunny? Is it shady? Is it big? Is it small? Because there's a plant for you. I feel like that should be a slogan. There's a plant for you. And then you can take that harvest and then you can preserve it. And preservation can happen in a variety of ways. We can, there's pickling, there's fermenting for people who want to really get into this. I find that incredibly fascinating, but not something I do much of. There's dehydrating, there's freezing. I mean, you don't have to be incredibly skilled. I mean, dehydrating and freezing are very easy things to do. And you don't need a dehydrator to preserve your harvest. I think that's another misconception. I like to grow herbs. I like to grow a lot of herbs. I like to dry my herbs. And at my old home, I had set up just a string right above my kitchen windowsill, and I attached clips, and we would just bundle it. We'd snip them, put our elastic band around it, hang it up, wait a week, a couple days, whatever it was, until it was dry, and then we put it in a jar, take it off the stems, put it in a jar, and save it for later. So again, there's a lot of easy ways that you can preserve your harvest. You don't need a lot of equipment. Of course, if you want to get into canning and stuff, you can do water bath canning, you can do pressure canning. And yes, those can be an investment. So start small. Start with what you have. Start with the space you have available to you. Don't allow yourself to get overwhelmed with all of the grand possibilities. Start with where you're at. So on that note, I want to talk a little bit about some of the easiest ways to get started, or just the idea of starting with where you're at. So when I first started gardening, I think my very first year, we grew a lot of tomatoes. We grew a couple peppers. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, so we're thinking about maybe 7 or 8 years ago was the first time I ever put a garden in. And I learned something that is a really important lesson, I think, for everyone to learn when they first start gardening. You don't need to plant what you don't eat. And I think that's very, I think that should be common sense, but we get so wrapped up in the idea that, well, if we're having a home garden, we need to grow this, we need to grow that. This is what you do. And so we grew things like cherry tomatoes. And honestly, we don't eat a lot of tomatoes in my house, especially cherry tomatoes. I have a lot of nieces and nephews now, and I will grow more now that they come over and they eat them, but my kids don't really eat them. So keeping that in mind, if you don't eat tomatoes, don't grow tomatoes. If you want to grow to share, awesome. If you're going to preserve them, if you have a plan in place to grow something and preserve it, that's another way, you can keep that in mind as well. But my first year, I had never canned before in my life. I didn't eat salsa. I ate tomato sauce, but I mean, I'd never made tomato sauce, I don't think, before in my life. So at least not without the help of store-bought ingredients. So keep that in mind as you're getting started. Don't dive in too deeply, too quickly, because you're just going to overwhelm yourself. Start with where you're at. Now I love canning salsa. That's probably my biggest thing. I love to make 40, 50 jars of salsa every season, and I love to share it with people. So we grow a lot of tomatoes, but I still don't grow a ton of cherry tomatoes because they aren't being eaten. Another example I want to give you is grow something that fits your lifestyle. And I'm going to use tomatoes again as this example. So if you don't have a lot of time on your hands to garden, you might not want to grow a cherry tomato plant or something that fits this category. Cherry tomatoes produce quickly. Once it's the height of the season, you could be harvesting almost daily or every other day. So if you don't have the time to dedicate to go out and pick those tomatoes that frequently, you might want to consider growing a different variety. You might want to consider growing something that takes longer to grow. You might want to grow a big tomato, a beefsteak tomato. I'm a huge fan of some of the really large heirloom varieties, fun colors and things, but they take longer to grow. So I don't have to worry about making sure I'm out there regularly. So that's something to keep in mind too, is, what kind of availability do you have? Not just what you eat. In the spring, if you're going to grow lettuce when it's really rainy season and it's nice and cool, that's great. But if you're going to try to grow it in the summer, you really it requires more work to keep it from bolting. So again, these are things that you might want to think about before you dive right in, is what are you really going to eat, and what kind of time can you dedicate to your garden? Because while yes, we all want to garden, it's not really helping us live self-sufficiently if we're growing something that ends up contributing to our waste as opposed to contributing to our household. So that's something else you can consider. I myself, we just moved in November, so we're still setting up our homestead here at our new house, but I like to incorporate every type of gardening. So we do container gardening here. We have a ton of stuff in the ground here. I do not have raised beds here at the moment, but I have plans for raised beds. I'm also a very big fan of raised beds just because I find it easier to control the quality of my soil within the raised beds. And I also find it easier to control weeds and things. So, and for my crop rotations and stuff like that. So I like doing that. But like I said, I also have a bunch of stuff in the ground. We also have container gardens. We have perennial gardens and herb gardens as well. So there's a lots of different types of gardening. You can grow your own food. Maybe you don't want to grow food and you just want to grow vegetables. Herbs. That's the one I meant. Maybe you just want to grow herbs and you're not interested in growing a pepper or a tomato. Another thing that you might learn through time is that you eat more of one thing over another. I started off, the same number of tomato plants as I planted pepper plants. And I've realized, we eat a lot more peppers, and I find that the pepper plants produce less volume per plant than a tomato plant will. So we now will grow almost double the number of pepper plants than we do tomato plants. So again, these are just some things to think about. The benefits to gardening, I think a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory, but I mean, we save a ton of money when you grow your own produce. You are saving money. The cost of a tomato plant versus weekly shopping at the store for tomatoes, I mean, there's a huge savings there. Another benefit to starting your own garden would be that it is a step towards self-sufficiency. You are providing something for your household on your property. Again, another thing would be that when you are growing your own produce, you can control the nutrients in your soil. You can constantly amend your soil. So the nutritious value of the produce that you're growing at your home is generally speaking going to be much greater than that is store-bought from something produced on a big farm. So that's something that's really cool to think about. And then another way that you can start to homestead, or another common area of homesteading, would be raising livestock. Now, we live in Attleboro. We're not a right to farm community. I know like Rehoboth, some of our nearby towns are. So the rules in Attleboro are different. The zoning rules are different, from every town. So make sure that if you are going to include some sort of livestock in your homestead, that you do look up what your town's zoning and ordinances are. In Attleboro, you can have up to 6 chickens without a permit. And then if you want more than that, you need to get a permit. We are not zoned for roosters. And, many homesteads, again, they choose to raise animals for one reason or another. And some of the most common choice I would say is definitely chickens, but there's also ducks and geese. Again, depending on where you live, maybe you can have goats or sheep or cows. Now, another thing that I didn't mention, it's not really livestock, would also be bees, which is great for your garden. And if you're interested in beekeeping, I don't personally know a ton about it, and it's something I'm learning about, but there are different ways to keep pollinators on your property. And it's not just through honeybees. I mean, there's tons of different types of bees that will pollinate. There's mason bees that you can have on your property. There's a lot of different ways to include pollinators. But again, for livestock, for the backyard homestead in Attleboro, chickens, in my opinion, is kind of the way to go. 6 chickens is not a lot of work. They're very easy to keep around. Whether you're raising chickens for eggs or for meat, you kind of just need to think about, okay, what is it that you want out of it? For a small number of chickens, like 6, eggs is probably the most long-term sustainable way to contribute back to your household. The cool thing about raising chickens for eggs is you can control what you're feeding them. And this is just a little side note here. If you have members of your family that have specific food allergies, and this is actually one of the reasons why years ago we had originally gotten into chickens, into raising chickens for eggs, was so we could control their feed, eliminate dietary things that one of my children has allergies to, or had allergies to at the time. And certain proteins don't carry through. So, or rather, I'm sorry, they do carry through to the egg. So if your chicken is eating soy, or if they're eating corn, those proteins are going into the egg, and your family might be struggling eating eggs. So you can control the feed, and you can eliminate some potential allergens, which might make eggs a possibility in your household. So I think that's a really cool thing. So again, you want to think too about not just raising them, but if you feel comfortable taking care of chickens from the beginning to the end, or any livestock, things happen, and you might be put in the position to, whether they're old, to deal with deaths of your livestock through accident, other wildlife, or if maybe they've just outgrown their time. So that's something you kind of want to think about if you feel like you can do that. Us personally, we will raise our hens or get eggs from our hens until they reach an older age. And then when the time comes, we will cull the flock and we will process our own chickens, and we will use them for stew meat. Again, thinking self-sustainable and trying to take a more no waste approach to things. We feel that when they've reached the end of their productive period for egg laying, by processing them and freezing them for later so we can use them as stew meat is just another great way to reduce waste. They contribute to our household from the beginning to the end. Another great benefit of having chickens is they're excellent at reducing your household waste. Maybe there's things in my refrigerator that, or even in the garden, whether it made it into the house or not, that I don't feel great about eating, or I know that, if I eat this today or harvest this today, maybe it made it past it. Maybe I didn't harvest it. Maybe I forgot. And the window in which it was going to be the most flavorful, or whatever it is. Maybe it started to rot a little. Maybe it bolted because it was lettuce, or maybe I missed my harvest window on my broccoli, whatever it is. Certainly there are times where I will still harvest it and I will find a great way to incorporate it into our meals. But then other times, if I think it's just going to be a little bit more work than I'm willing to put in at that moment, I know that my chickens are another way that I can reduce waste. These things are not going into the garbage. They will go and be a great treat for my chickens. Even those tomatoes that are a little bit, I don't want to eat them anymore. I certainly can't preserve them anymore. So my chickens are going to have a field day. So again, they're really great at reducing waste. They're excellent at keeping certain pests off your property and insects. They really are wonderful. Which I actually think is a perfect segue into composting. So we're talking about reducing waste. And if you have livestock and you're gardening, I think you should be composting anyway. And even if you don't, I think everybody should be composting. And I'm just going to say that before we started composting, again, so we're a family of 5. We probably filled up on average 4, maybe sometimes 5 kitchen trash bags of garbage that would go out to the street every week. And somewhere along the line, maybe 5-6 years ago, we started composting. And right now, my family of 5 will fill up on average, 1 trash bag a week, maybe 2 depending on the week. So we've cut in half, if not more, our waste. Part of that is also that we've gotten better at not wasting leftovers and things like that, just really narrowing that down. But even that, if I do have leftovers, I mean, chickens, they're really great at things, but also you can compost a lot. So I think everybody should be composting. And I think that if you start to look into composting, I think this is where people get turned off. You'll see that, the recommendation is 2 parts brown, 1 part green. And so when we're talking about brown, we're talking about your carbons, your sticks and leaves and stems of plants and things like that. When we're talking about your green, we're talking about your nitrogen. So grass clippings, oftentimes when weeding the garden, we've got our kitchen scraps that go out to the compost weekly. But I think people can get very overwhelmed by this. So I just want to say, don't overcomplicate it. Just do it. Really, it's not hard. I have a very, I was going to say lazy approach to everything that I do. And I don't know if lazy is the right word, but simple. It needs to be simple if it's not going to fit my family. And I feel like if we could all just take that mindset, it needs to be simple. There's so many ways to keep it simple. So composting, we've got, you can do a big system. You can do a 3-bin system, which we do because we have chickens and they produce, bedding and chicken manure waste, and all of that gets composted. But if you remove that, I also have a little tiny compost tumbler that I keep close to the house. And this is where I started, was just with a little 2-bin tumbler. There are so many different types of small, like plastic black compost bins that you can buy from pretty much any local hardware store. I don't know if the city has a composting incentive program at this moment. I know they did a couple of years ago. I'm not sure about that. It's definitely worth looking into, though. But I mean, even with just our little bin system, we have our little pail that we keep in the house. Anytime we're preparing a meal with fresh cut veggies or things, all the stems, everything that we're cutting off that would have gone into the trash goes into the compost bin, which gets taken out to the outdoor bin weekly. And the tumbling systems, personally, I think are great. They're very simple. They don't require mixing. Every time you add something, you just roll the bin a couple times and it mixes it. Every time I'm outside, I just give the bin a roll. And in a few weeks or a month, depending on, what you're putting in, you will have ready to use compost, and it goes right back into my garden or in the flower beds. And again, we're reducing waste. And even if you just put it out in the woods, I don't know, depending on where you live, or I've even had people come to my house and take compost because everybody needs compost. And we spend so much money on compost if you're gardening, or other ways to amend your soil, other, fertilizers and organic fertilizers and things to amend your soil, to add nutrients back to your vegetable gardens. So why not compost? So again, I would say, don't overcomplicate it. Just get started. Worst case scenario, you have compost that takes longer to break down. I mean, if the ratios are off from carbon to green, it's just going to take longer. But I mean, and we throw our grass clippings in it occasionally too. It really depends on what we have. But again, I don't even think about it anymore. I just throw it in. What happens, happens. Because I know that I'm not wasting things. I know that I'm not contributing to the garbage fill, the landfill. You don't need to overcomplicate it. There are some really cool systems, actually. And for people who are interested in looking into this, I recently was introduced to, I believe it's called SubPod. And it is a vermicompost, which is so worm composting type system. I've never vermicomposted. I'm very intrigued by it. I know plenty of people who do it, and I know that the vermicomposting breaks down a lot faster and produces a usable product a lot faster than traditional composting. So it definitely has its benefits. You also can put a wider variety of things into vermicomposting than you can traditional composting. So again, some really cool benefits, but sub pods, if you're interested in looking it up, it is a vermicompost system that you put right into the ground, which I find very intriguing. It kind of takes all the work out of it. So you're throwing your scraps in, anything that you would be composting traditionally, and the worms essentially go in and out of the bins. So you bury it in your garden beds, and the worms do the work for you. They distribute the compost essentially as they go in and out of the bin. So I'm very intrigued by this, and I'd love to see if I can find a way to incorporate something like that here on my homestead, because again, I'm all about anything that can reduce our waste and reduce my personal work, while still continuing to live, with this idea of self-sustainability and self-sufficiency I'm just anything that furthers us towards that goal is really, what I'm interested in. So I do want to mention just a couple other ways that you can homestead or urban homestead. So cooking from scratch is one, foregoing pre-made food and packaged foods. Another thing is, living in harmony with the land. Now that's kind of a broad statement, but I think this is kind of a key aspect to homesteading, respecting and nurturing the land that you share. So this could be buying eco-friendly products or aiming for organic cleaning and personal care products, so you're not adding to the pollution of the water table. Or maybe go so far as to make some of your own household products. That's actually a lot of fun too, and that's something that if you have children or families, that's something that you can really do together. And then the last thing I would say is reduce and reuse. And what's that saying? Reduce, reuse, recycle. Reuse, 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 reuse. Reuse glassware, reuse pots, reuse everything and anything. I mean, you want to reduce your waste, you want to homestead, you really want to limit your consumer purchasing. And there are so many ways that you can reuse things or buy secondhand. A lot of glass things that we buy for our homestead, for our preservation, we'll buy it secondhand. Go to Savers, go to the thrift store. There's some really cool stuff there. But basically, aim to reduce your consumer purchasing, and reduce your, I'm sorry, I lost my words here. But yes, just reduce, reuse, recycle. That's like the best way to live by, especially if you're homesteading. I think that's really all I have for you guys. I mean, we could talk about pollinators all day and things like that, but I've probably talked for a while. So Evan, if there are questions, I'm happy to answer some or do my best. I hear you. It was very staticky. You're very quiet, but I can hear you now.
Yeah, I will try to speak up. So let's see. I was talking about the just learning a lot, and there was especially the protein intake, and then passing that on to people that eat the eggs, the chicken eggs. I did not know that was a thing, and that's a really cool idea that you can kind of control that right at your home if you have your own chickens. Yeah, that's really cool. I also, the composting, we have a composting at our house, and we have the bins that we spin, and it's really simple. We just pour it in.
It is. Yeah.
Give it a spin, and that's it.
And I know that there's there are systems, I feel like they're probably more common than tumblers, where it's just like an upright plastic thing. I've never personally used it, and so I can't say like I don't recommend it or I do, but I just find the tumbling system so much easier because you don't have to do the work of trying to aerate it and stuff. So I think they're really cool, and they're not that expensive.
Yeah, definitely. And another cool thing about composting is you can make if you want to make your own, you can do like a little project with it and get creative. If you have like extra wood around or something, you can make your own like outdoor box and just kind of you know, reuse in that sense and have your own little project to do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as far as making your own compost bin too, there are so many different like DIY. So like, yeah, you can use wood. I mean, I've seen people just use like wire fencing and fence things in and different things. Again, I always say, whatever you're going to do, try to go with convenience. You don't want to set yourself up with a project that you're not going to follow through with. So if you overcomplicate it from the beginning, and in your, like, you know, you set up this big 3-bin system and you're in your head, you're like, I'm going to put it in this bin, and then, which is what I like to do. And then you would transfer it to the middle bin, and then it bakes in the, you know, whatever. That's awesome if you are going to follow through with that. But people should really think about, you know, what do they realistically have time for? And I think starting small and then upgrading later is definitely the way to go, because it can get overwhelming quickly if you haven't thought through it. Yeah,
definitely. And that was kind of, I actually had one more question I jotted down, which is like, how much do you think homesteading is like learning as you go? It sounds like a lot of it is like take one step at a time and then just build off of that rather than just doing it all at once.
Definitely. So when I started gardening, just like a little funny story. So I think my middle child is now 9, and he was little, a year and a half maybe, and when I planted my first garden. And the running joke in the house at the time was that I had a black thumb. I couldn't keep a houseplant alive. I had never really gardened before. We didn't do much gardening growing up. I think I remember planting potatoes once. But it wasn't a thing in our house. And my first year of gardening at home was so successful that I kind of got hooked. And I think 2 years after that, we got our first dozen chickens. And that, again, that was all kind of surrounding the idea. So my middle child had food allergies. And so really it was the interest. So one thing was successful, and then I wanted to know, well, what else can I do? And again, it's different for everybody in every household, I'm sure. But for me, at the time, I was a stay-at-home mom, and I was looking for ways to contribute to my household. I knew I couldn't work at that time. It didn't make sense for our family for me to try to go back to work at that time. So I knew that I wanted to produce something tangible for my family, and I was so intrigued and quite honestly surprised with how easy it was. I think that we have a tendency to overcomplicate things. So people are overwhelmed. I was recently talking to someone about composting specifically, and it just seemed so overwhelming to them. And I'm like, yeah, but really you just need a bin, the proper bin, just throw it in, just put it in there, turn it, and maybe in a couple of weeks you'll have compost. And maybe it's not a couple of weeks, maybe it's a couple months, but you know what? You still did it. You still get compost in the end. You can't fail at it really. So like, it's not, it's definitely learning as you go for sure. But it's not even just learning how to. I would say more importantly, it's learning what works best for your household. What works for my household may not work for somebody, obviously, who lives on a smaller property. What works for my household may not work for somebody who works a busier schedule. What works for my household right now, or rather, let me put this way, what worked for my household 5 years ago doesn't work for my household anymore. As I do work full time now, and I do a lot of teaching things and sharing my time with my community. So I don't do as much preservation the same way. I simplify it as much as possible now, because again, I don't have the same kind of time available to me. So I think that's really important, is learning what's going to work for you. I love to go back to the cherry tomato example always. I mean, I can't tell you, one of my first years gardening at the community garden, so this was before I was on the committee, before I became the coordinator, I planted so many cherry tomatoes there. And it was a horrible idea. It was just horrible, because it's not on my property. It wasn't at my house. And so there was just so many cherry tomatoes all over the ground, like every time I would come back. And so it's like, okay, think smarter, not harder. Like, don't do things that are going to require you to put more time into it. Figure out what you have available and then work around that instead. So that's really, like, I feel like the biggest lesson, that we have these grand ideas. If people can take a step back, add more if you have more time, but don't start off with these great ambitions. Like, work into it slowly, because the worst thing you could do is overwhelm yourself and then abandon the idea that, you know, living self-sustainably and self-sufficiently is impossible. And it's not. It's really not. There's so many ways that we can increase our own self-reliance. So again, simple and self-reliant is really kind of what you want to think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that the more that I do stuff like this, it actually makes doing something similar, like say I'm composting if I want chickens or whatever, it makes that task even easier just because I'm already kind of in the mindset. And that's the same with like reducing we have the same thing. I mean, we put out our trash like every 2 weeks, I think, or something. We create so little trash because most of the stuff we have is compost. And it's great, one, because our trash doesn't smell that bad because it's not food scraps. And it's less trash to deal with. Compost is so easy to deal with because you just throw it outside. So it's like very convenient, and it's like ease of, it just makes your life a little bit easier.
Absolutely. And especially if you are a gardener, I mean, I know people who bring in yards and yards. Now, granted, I won't lie. I did purchase 4 yards of compost this year as I, put in brand new gardens. We transformed a space here that was all grass. And we transformed it into this beautiful, like, strolling garden with rock pathways. It was one of like my dreams that I wanted to do at my brand new home. So I did that for sure. But I know people who will buy, bags of compost or even, yards of compost every season. And it's like, well, if you're gardening regularly enough to require to bring that in, then you're probably producing enough organic material to really make your own compost to supply that for you. And again, as you just said, it is so easy. One of my first real big years of composting, again, I have chickens, so there's a lot of waste. We had a tube-in system at our old house. I remember filling up. I actually tried to find the picture so you could put it up, but I do have pictures somewhere. And it was a wheelbarrow full of just dark, rich compost. And it was light and fluffy. And I know that sounds super nerdy, but I was like so proud of myself for like being able to produce this like just such rich compost, because again, I knew that the alternative was that I was going to go buy 5 or 6 bags of it. So it definitely felt very satisfying and accomplished. Yeah. I mean, really, but again, knowing that you've reduced what you're putting in landfills, and not only through composting, but just by reusing things or buying secondhand. Again, I think homesteading, backyard homesteading or urban homesteading, when we're talking about it, even if you don't have, maybe you're raising rabbits or chickens, or maybe you're not doing anything livestock, you can grow a basil plant, a rosemary plant. You can have your own little herb garden, no matter where you are. You can cook from scratch. Maybe you don't have the time to cook from scratch. You can buy secondhand. You can, I can't tell you how many like jars I save from things, if the lid is good enough or if it'll fit a regular mason jar lid. And, I keep them separate. Obviously, I'm not going to can with them later because I don't want to risk compromising the integrity of it or whatever. But I'll save it for something. I can store dried herbs in it. I can put the lid back on later of a sauce jar, which I have, or applesauce jars, whatever it is that we have. And I've got one filled with lavender, and I've got one filled with chamomile. And I love growing herbs specifically for teas. I'm a huge tea drinker, and I think they're fun gifts. So that's another one that I like to do. But again, it's very easy. You just kind of need to think outside the box a little bit. And, again, I think if you can keep in your mind the maybe not no waste approach, because that's pretty difficult. Hard. But reduced waste, if you can really keep that in your mind with everything that you're doing, I think that you're really on the right step towards, creating that homestead.
And, everyone, I think that's such a good point, and everyone has their own level of, what they're able to do. And it's important for people to just try and do what they can, but, not to try to hit an expectation that's too high for them to reach. And people can kind of set that for themselves, which is also what's very fun about it. Cause it's, an individual experience and you get to kind of do it on your own, and it's fun. You create your path.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you say it's fun, because it is fun. Going into it, would I have thought, oh, this is so much fun, we're going to start composting? No, like, of course not. I wasn't like, composting sounds like a blast, let's do it. But like, as you do these things, it does become fun. Chickens has been a really cool experience personally. If you for anyone who raises chickens, I mean, you get to buy your birds, you get to pick them out, so you get to think about, what color eggs do I want to collect? And even that's a really fun experience. I'm sure it's a blast for my kids and my nieces and nephews. They love to come over and collect the eggs. But honestly, for me, I think it's loads of fun to go out to the coop and find not just white eggs and not just brown eggs, but I've got blue eggs and I'll have green eggs. Like, it's just it really makes the experience rewarding and enjoyable, and it's fun. I mean, fun is the best way to put it, but it becomes, it's not burdensome at that point. Sure. It's not, because you don't want to incorporate something that feels like a burden. If it's too hard, and like I said, if you overcomplicate something and it just is too hard, you're not going to long-term do this. So if anybody ever wants chickens, talk to me about it, because I could talk again. That's been fun too. Raising chickens with kids is a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure that they have a great time. Yeah, and also another thing I was just thinking about was, especially with with COVID, we all kind of realized the importance of getting outside and being outside, and this is like one of the best ways to connect with the land around you and nature, really, because you're just working with things that are growing, or you're working with organic materials or animals or whatever it is. So it really is a great way. It can be exercise too. It can be a mental thing. It can be whatever it is, but it really is only beneficial for you.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, I know we were talking a little bit before this go live. I think one of the cool things about homesteading is the more you do it, the more you start to realize, you can do everything right. But if the environment around you isn't working towards that goal as well. So, I say the environment, so the birds, the bees, I mean, you really start to take on this permaculture ideology. And you learn, like, I think my first year, I didn't have a single flower really on my property. And you really learn the importance of, nurturing the land around you, not just by putting nutrients back into the ground, or not just by thinking like, crop rotation and just what you get out of it, but it starts to become what you can contribute to it as well. So that's really cool. And also the other cool thing about homesteading, as far as lessons learned, we live in such a instant, like, throwaway culture, and homesteading, I feel, is such the opposite of that. You really have to plan, especially when you really get into it. You have to plan things. So I love to grow seedlings. Every February, I start combing through catalogs, looking at my seeds. This is something I personally find super rewarding, and have a huge love for. But, like, again, there's a planning process to things. And even if you're just gardening or whatever you're doing, there's really nothing's instant in homesteading. Nothing really is very instant. Everything kind of takes a little bit of thought, or a lot of, you takes actions now and the rewards come later. So it is it teaches us patience. It teaches us preparation. But again, it's rewarding. The end result is always very rewarding, but it's not that same instant gratification. It's just such a contrast to that throwaway culture. So I just find that really cool, especially now, as I do raise littles here. It's something that, I want to pass on to them. I really want my kids to have an appreciation, and everybody. It's part of why I share things. I want people to see and to appreciate the way that I do. Just the beauty of it. But also, again, with that throwaway culture idea, just to contrast that, like, no, we can still get gratification. We can still feel that reward. It doesn't have to be instant. It's just the fruits of your labor, literally. So I just think that's such an important part of the process as well, and important lesson with homesteading.
Definitely. It also forces you to put down the phone or the devices or whatever, which is always a good thing, especially with kids. Get them engaged using their hands and just outside. Yep. It's always
absolutely
great. All right, so I think that we've covered pretty much everything here. We've covered a lot. I'm glad. Yeah,
I'm sorry. This is a really long thing.
No, this is great. I think that there's still people here, and I think everyone really enjoyed your talk, and you had so much to share. I certainly learned a lot. So I think we all appreciate that. So I just want to give you, is there any last things that you'd like to say before I kind of wrap up? Or are you good?
I mean, I'm pretty much good. I feel like I've said everything there is to say. I mean, just that if anybody ever wants, I'm always available. If someone would like to learn, you know, maybe how they can incorporate it in their space, I'm happy to answer their questions. Again, because it can be overwhelming and it often feels like, well, where do I start? Go to the library. There's so many books. I've read so many books. There's a lot of cool resources locally online. I mean, there are so many resources, but if it just feels too overwhelming and someone wants to say, hey, Danny, this is what I have. Where do you think I can start? I'm happy to help them.
Cool. Great. I'm sure people will reach out. I also forgot there are a couple of people that were mentioning in the comments. They were saying, Jesse said that you've convinced them to start composting, which is great.
Awesome.
And some other folks that were saying that they separated trash and food compost as a kid, and really just getting back to their mentality, which is pretty cool to see.
Yeah, well, and in that, I think that, you know, again, we've gotten so far away from this idea. It's just, it shouldn't. It should just be so second nature. And I really hope that, you know, more and more households can, especially compost. It's so easy.
I know.
It's so easy. But
sure.
yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. For that fantastic presentation. There are a couple things I just want to mention before we wrap up. So just to remind everyone, July 17th is the Hike Attleboro Day. It'll be at the Richardson Nature Preserve, and it's collaboration with Mass Audubon, the City of Attleboro, and the Attleboro Land Trust. So definitely, if you're interested, definitely come to that on July 17th. And if you haven't watched any of the other videos in this series, you're welcome to watch those. They're on our Attleboro Land Trust Facebook and YouTube channels. So I definitely recommend checking those out. I think that's everything I have. So I appreciate you being here and giving us a fantastic presentation. It seems like people really enjoyed it. So definitely appreciate it.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.